Okay, so I wanted to go over this study in a little more detail than I could do in class. And this study highlights the effects of the critical band on masking. Okay, so the way this study was set up is that they were looking for the detection of a 2000 hertz signal, and they varied the bandwidth of the masker from 50 hertz, which is pretty narrow, to 3200 hertz. So if you think of a masker bandwidth, let me just show you what that means. So if you were going to have a 50 hertz, let's say this was 2000 hertz right here, and you had like a 50 hertz masker, it might be about this wide, meaning that there's about 50 hertz worth of energy. And 100 hertz would have this much masking, so it double, okay? And then a 200 would be more than that, right? So then this would be the spectrum of the masker. And then 800, 1600, right? You would have a wider masker. This is the spectrum of the masker, meaning what frequency content excuse me, was contained in the masker. And let's say 3200, you had the broadest band masker that was used. Okay, but it's all centered around 2000 hertz. Okay, so let's erase this. So here's what they did. With the 50 hertz masker, okay, so again, they're measuring the ability to hear that 2000 hertz tone. So they, oops, hold on, let me get my back. Okay, so let's show the masking on here again. So with a 50 hertz masker, so this more narrow bandwidth of masking, the threshold was what, about 71 right here. Okay, then, oh, did it all go away? Let me do that again. So here's the narrowband masker, 50 hertz bandwidth. So it's not a broadband masker. And there you get a threshold. So when they added that masking with the 2000 hertz, they got that threshold around 71. Then they added more masking, so they went to 100 hertz. So they, widened. I'm going to use different colors because I feel like that'll help you grasp it. So they widened that that bandwidth of the masker, and it raised the threshold to what? About 72.5. So more information is in that critical band, right? If you think about previous pictures where you had the critical band, you had the pure tone in there. So basically what we're doing is we're adding more information to the critical band. Actually, let me draw that over here. So if this is a critical band, this is the threshold, or this is the tone. Let me get this in here. Okay. So let's just go up to the 100 hertz. So let's say now we added the 50 hertz masking, and it was, this much masking, and it raised the threshold some. And now we are at 100, right? So we've added a little bit more masking. Okay. We're broader. Okay. Then we go to 200 hertz, right? So we add a little bit more bandwidth to the masking. And so here's over the spectral side of it, just showing that. So now it's wider. And then over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add more masking. Okay. So it's starting to fill up that critical band, basically. And it raises the threshold a little bit. And then we add a little bit more, about 400 hertz. So let's add more masking. This is pretty. Picking all these different colors. So now we have more masking. So now we're about 400 hertz masking. And so now we've essentially, what we've done is we've filled up that critical band. Okay. by increasing the bandwidth of the masking, we increase the amount of masking that occurs. So now it takes 75 dB. So the broader the bandwidth, the increased threshold we see. Now, but after 400 hertz, if we make it even wider, so now we do 800 hertz, right? So we're making this wider, right? Now the bandwidth is this, and now the bandwidth is here. And you'll notice one thing, that now the extra signal is outside of that critical band, and therefore not affecting the threshold. So even with a broader 800 hertz bandwidth, you're not seeing a change in the threshold. It's staying about the same. And then you go to a 1600 hertz, I think you get it. So if you go to a 1600 hertz now, it's broader, right? And none of that stuff is in the critical band, so therefore it is not changing threshold. Threshold is staying about 75 dB. So you can say that the bandwidth, the critical bandwidth of this particular auditory filter is about 400 hertz, because after that, nothing changes. After you add 800, 1200, 1600, 3000, right? You broaden that bandwidth of the masker. Once you do that and you've exceeded the critical band, it has no effect on the threshold for detecting that 2000 hertz tone. Okay? And again, the critical band, the concept of the critical band and this auditory filter bandwidth is really what allows us to hear these finite differences in sound. And with hearing loss, remember, critical band goes from normal hearing to hearing loss, and it increases the bandwidth of that band, and it doesn't allow for individual harmonics to be processed, or individual frequencies to be processed, because it's wider. So better frequency selectivity, poorer frequency selectivity. Okay, hopefully that helps understand. It helps you understand and conceptualize this concept of the critical band.